Sometime in summer of 2019, I happened to have a discussion with Swamiji at our home and expressed my interest of bringing together Eastern and Western teachers on the same platform at our Arshavidya ashram located in Pocono Mountains, Pennsylvania. But due to many reasons, that did not materialize, but instead, under the present circumstances, it shaped up in today's virtual event. I would like to thank both of them for making this a reality. Hopefully, once we are over this pandemic, sometime in future, I'll be able to arrange a weekend retreat with similar format at our ashram with a couple of additional teachers like Francis Lucille and Swami Tattva-Vidananda. Now, I would like to introduce Rick Archer of Bed Gap, well-acclaimed author of Buddha at the Gas Pump. After establishing Bed Gap in 2009, Rick has interviewed more than 250 spiritually awakening people. Many of you may have watched a number of his interviews with many Advaita-Vedanta non-duality teachers. Rick will be a moderator for Q&A session for the rest of the event. We would like to thank Rick very much for taking an initiative to lead today's session. With that, now I would like to turn it over to both teachers, starting with Swami Sarvapriyananda.
Namaste, everybody. Yeah.
Swamiji, just in brief, from your perspective, if you can please give a summary of what is non-duality mean to you. We'll start with that, and then Rupert will follow. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji, and namaste to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with this worldwide audience, especially with Rupert Spira. So what is non-duality? Well, literally, this word non-duality means not two. And this is the equivalent, English equivalent of the Sanskrit advaita. Dvaita means two, and advaita means not two. The crucial insight here is that even when we experience the many, there could be an underlying oneness. So we could be looking at a multiplicity, and we could also know that underneath all of that appearance, it is one reality. For example, look out into the waves of the Atlantic Ocean, and you see thousands of waves there. And we know all of those thousands of waves are actually one water. When you count waves, you can count thousands, all appearing and disappearing. But when you count water, you have to say that there is nothing but water there. There is no second reality apart from water there, though you see thousands of waves. Another example could be gold and ornaments. You see a whole array of gold jewelry maybe, but all different, they look different, they have different names, bracelets, necklaces, and so on. But when you know that there's gold, you know that there is only one reality there, one substance there. Apart from gold, there is no second thing. None of those ornaments are a second reality apart from gold. In fact, the best example would be our dreams. So when we fall asleep and we dream, there are people and there are places and there are activities going on. There is the sky and the earth and so many things, so many activities, so much action. And yet we know when we wake up, there was nothing there except the dreamer's mind. The dreamer's mind in itself appeared as a multiplicity. So that's the crucial insight of non-duality. In the experience of the diversity of our lives, there is an underlying oneness. Now, it's all very well to talk about water and waves or gold and the ornaments or even the dreamer's mind and the multiplicity of a dream. But in this universe, our experience of our life, this tremendous diversity, what is the underlying oneness? What is the underlying non-duality? This is the remarkable thing about non-dual philosophy of Advaita, is that it says, stunningly, it's you. It's you, the real you. You are that non-dual reality, that absolute reality which appears as a multiplicity. How is that possible? So we are invited to take a look at our experience. This is another great thing about Advaita or non-dual philosophy, is that it talks about our present experience, all the time available. Investigate that, and we at once notice that we are aware. We exist, I am, and I'm aware. And we are invited to see that it is in this awareness existence that everything appears. It's not that I am separate and there is a multiplicity of a world outside, but rather when I take a stand in awareness, I notice everything appears to awareness. This awareness is also existence. So in this unlimited awareness existence, here I'm translating a term from Advaita, which is Satyam Jnanam Anantam. Satyam means isness or being. Jnanam means awareness. And Anantam means unlimited. So this unlimited isness awareness is our real nature. Why I say real nature is because we normally think of ourselves as this bundle of flesh and blood and a mind, thoughts and feelings, as a person, embodied person. And non-dualism claims that this couldn't be further from the truth. Deeper investigation into our experience of life shows that we are this unlimited being awareness, isness awareness. And this isness awareness is the fundamental, if you will, the stuff of this universe. There is no second thing, really, apart from this isness awareness. I mean, if there is anything that appears different from this isness awareness, it is also ultimately that same isness awareness, just appearing to be different. So this is the non-dual reality. You, the real you, we, the real us, we are the non-dual reality of this universe, which appears as a world of diversity. And non-duality says that once we realize this, it takes us beyond suffering. It gives us the ultimate fulfillment. This non-dual reality is itself isness, awareness, and also all value, meaning, purpose, happiness, fulfillment in life. The Sanskrit ananda or bliss. So this is the claim of non-duality, that we are the ultimate reality of this universe, and there is no second reality apart from this isness awareness. I guess, I mean, in Sanskrit, there's one sentence which sums it all up. It says, Tat Tvamasi, that thou art. You are that. This is, I guess, how you would sum up non-dualism, the Advaita version of it, at least. Yes. Rupert?
Thank you, Swami, and hello, everyone, and welcome. What is non-duality? I would suggest that the non-dual teaching has evolved to, or has appeared to answer or respond to three existential questions that have troubled people from all times, in all places, and under all circumstances. The first question refers to our inner life. How may we find lasting peace and happiness? The second question refers to our outer life, the experience of the world and others. What is the nature of reality? And the third question addresses the relationship between ourselves and the world, namely, how should we live? So in response to the first question, the non-dual, the first question, how may we find lasting peace and happiness? The non-dual teaching suggests very simply that happiness is our nature. Happiness is what we are. Happiness is the nature of being. We might respond to this suggestion by saying, well, if happiness is the nature of myself and I am always myself, why do I not experience happiness all the time? And the non-dual teaching responds that whilst everybody has a sense of being their self, everybody has a sense, I am myself. Not everybody knows their self clearly. And it is as a result of this lack of clear self-knowledge that the peace and happiness that are our very nature are not fully felt or experienced. So this is why so much emphasis is, both in the Eastern and Western traditions, is placed on self-knowledge. It's why the word know thyself are carved above the temple of Apollo at Delphi. This understanding that in order to find peace and happiness, the ultimate fulfillment in life, one must first know oneself as we essentially are. Why do we not know ourselves as we essentially are? Because most people's sense of their self is mixed up with or identified with the content of experience. And this amalgam of our essential self plus the limitations of experience produces an illusory self, a separate self or ego. And this illusory self veils or obscures the peace and happiness that are our nature. In response to the second question, what is the nature of the world we see? What is the nature of the universe? What is the nature of reality? As Swami suggested, the non-dual teaching suggests that behind the multiplicity and diversity of objects and people, there lies a single, infinite, and indivisible whole or reality from which everyone and everything borrows their apparently independent existence. Just like all the characters in a movie borrow their apparent reality from the single, indivisible screen. So, why does this single, indivisible, and infinite reality appear as a multiplicity and diversity? Why does it appear in this dualistic subject-object relationship where otherness and separation seem to be so very real? It is, and I'm going to elaborate on the dream analogy that Swami suggested. It is one of the best, if not the best analogy that I know of for explaining this. As Swami suggested, when we fall asleep at night, our own mind overlooks or forgets that it is dreaming. In order to perceive the dreamed world, it must enter into our mind, enters into its own imagination, and seems to become a separate person, a separate subject of experience within its own dream, from whose perspective its own activity appears as the dreamed world. And of course, when we wake up, we realize we were not a separate subject of experience, and there were not numerous objects in themselves. It was all the activity of our own mind. Well, the non-dual teaching suggests that the ultimate reality, spirit, consciousness, the Godhead, Brahman, is, so to speak, dreaming or imagining the universe within itself. But in order to perceive that universe, it must temporarily overlook itself. It must localize itself as a separate subject of experience. And that's each of us. We are the separate subjects of experience, the eyes of a God, through which infinite consciousness views its own activity as an apparently outside world. The price it pays for this forgetting or overlooking of its true nature is suffering. And suffering is the call that we all feel to return from this apparently separate self to our true nature of infinite awareness. This unity behind the apparent multiplicity and diversity of experience is not something extraordinary or exotic, or it is known by everybody as the experiences of love and beauty. When we love someone, we feel that we are one with them, that our being is their being. The beauty is exactly the same experience in relation to an object rather than a person. When we feel that a landscape is beautiful or a piece of music is beautiful, we have at that moment ceased to be a separate subject of experience. We have merged with the apparent object. We have recognized our prior unity. And in response to the third question, how should we live? I cannot improve on St. Augustine's response to this question about the ethical, moral obligation of one who has this understanding. He simply replied, love and do whatever you want, which is almost exactly as the same response as Jesus gave, that is recorded in the Gospel of St. Matthew. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Treat everyone and everything as your own being. If love, that is the recognition of our shared being, if we understand and feel that we share our being with everyone and everything, any action that proceeds from that understanding will be in line with and an expression of that understanding. And one is free to do whatever one wants, as long as it is informed by this felt understanding of our shared being. So that's a very brief summary, or one way that one could summarize the non-dual understanding. So, Swami, unless you and I want to have anything you want to say or ask, we could ask Rick to respond or to bring a question from participants. Is there anything you'd like to say? We share a lot of analogies. The ocean, the dream, the screen.
It's true. If I may, there's one question that came to my mind when I was listening to, and I've listened to this earlier also. You talk about the universe and our experiences as the activity of consciousness. Now, purely from an Advaita philosophical perspective, they would not ascribe activity to consciousness. They would just say it's a manifestation of consciousness, because the activity they would put it at a relative level, a relatively true activity, just as there is really no activity going on in the screen, although there's a lot of action happening in the movie. So it's not really an activity of the screen. It's just the very natural, it's just what the screen is. It shines forth in that way.
Yes, yes. Yeah. I would agree with you. The term, the activity of consciousness, is a concession, as indeed any expression of truth is a concession to the mind. It's a concession to the mind that sees movement, change, multiplicity, diversity. It's just as, to use your first analogy, when we look out at the ocean, we don't see a static, motionless, actionless ocean. We see an ocean that is moving and flowing. So from that point of view, we could say that the waves are the activity of the ocean, that the dreamed world is the activity of the dreamer's mind, that the movie we watch is the activity of the screen. Of course, you're absolutely right. If we touch the screen, we're watching a movie. There's a tremendous amount of activity going on. Appears to be going on. But when we touch the screen is not moving. It is motionless. So I mean, it's from an ultimate point of view, the screen is not. It is motionless, but it appears as movement, change, multiplicity, diversity. Yes.
In fact, in ancient India, there were different flavors of non-dual philosophy. So one of them, the Kashmiri Shaiva version, does in fact attribute activity as a kind of activity to the ultimate consciousness. It is a power of consciousness, and they take it to be real. But Advaita Vedanta does not, for I think more for logical reasons, because they went through a nearly 1,000-year period of dialectics with opposites of philosophical schools. You know, the moment you attribute activity to consciousness, there's a whole host of dualistic philosophers and realistic philosophers who are waiting to say, gotcha. So if there's activity, there is change, and therefore you're back into a real dualistic world. But yes, from a spiritual point of view, one can see that you can regard this entire universe as just the manifestation of that one consciousness. Right. Should we ask Rick?
Rick, do you want to? Hi, Rick. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us.
There, I'm unmuted. Thank you. All right. So first of all, I think I'll pick up on the point you guys just made, which is that, and I'm glad Swamiji mentioned Kashmir Shaivism, because as I understand it, that discipline and also modern physics regards the sort of most fundamental level of nature's, of reality, as being both kind of silent and dynamic. It's said that at the level of the vacuum state, there's more energy, latent energy in a cubic centimeter of empty space than there is in the whole manifest universe. So it's understood that there's this tremendous dynamism or latent potentiality within the unmanifest field, and that all the dynamism we see in the more manifest realms is a reflection of that, or a manifestation of that, probably a very partial manifestation. So I have another question I was going to ask, but I better bounce this back to you, having said what I just said.
You want me to respond?
Either one.
Okay. Now, I know the tremendous temptation, especially in our modern world, to find some correlate in physics or in neuroscience to what Advaita or the ancient non-dual philosophies are saying. I'd just be careful about that. Not that I'm against it. Swami Vivekananda, for example, who brought this Vedanta to the West, all the way back, he was talking with Nikola Tesla about the possibility of finding correlates in the understanding of physics at that time with Vedanta and Sankhya philosophies and so on. So in principle, I'm not against it, and I think it's a really good thing, and we must come to it someday, some kind of understanding. I just think we are not there yet. Recently, Brian Greene, the well-known cosmologist here at Columbia, he was launching his new book, Until the End of Time. So I think if you look at the book, it's more philosophy than it is cosmology. And there he takes up the question about Advaita and modern cosmology. And he said, and he repeated it in the talk at Harvard University, he said that what you talk about in Vedanta is like a poetic echo. It's not science, it's like a poetic echo. It seems to be saying the same thing. It's like a poetic echo of what we find in modern cosmology, in modern physics. So yeah, a very senior monk once told me, don't be in a hurry to identify the latest discoveries of modern physics with Advaita-Vedanta or any of these philosophies, because physics is continuously changing, and the corridors of science are littered with the skeletons of past theories. So the moment you tie your understanding to one of these theories, and once that is disproved and science marches on, you are likely to be left behind in the dust also. But yes, you can clearly see parallels. These are very sophisticated. Maybe it's a different paradigm of understanding. I don't know. What would Rupert say about this?
I would say simply that I'm not a physicist and I'm not qualified to speak on physics, quantum physics view of even most of the physicists that I know. I don't know too many, but I've met quite a few over the years at the SAN conference. Most physicists don't understand quantum mechanics, and so I cannot comment on physics' current perspective. I'm not qualified to do so. So I think all I would say is that the phrase that you used, Rick, that the quantum field, I think you said it acts without acting. I like this. This is very in line with the Kashmiri Shaivite approach that, as I said before, that the screen appears as 10,000 people in motion, but it is itself not moving. In other words, we could say within the limits of the metaphor, the screen moves without moving. It acts without acting. In that sense, Shakti is the activity of Shiva. Yeah. Experience is a modulation of infinite consciousness.
He who in action sees inaction, and in inaction sees action, right, Swami? You were just talking about that the other night. Rupert, this question is from Baldeep Singh in Dubai, but I've embellished it quite a bit. Please correct me if I'm misquoting you, but in your recent interview with Tim Freak, you said that you relate more to the word God these days than to the term non-duality, but that you hesitate to speak that way because you would so easily be misunderstood. And Swami speaks of God in most of his talks. Ramana, Shankara, Ramakrishna, and many others in the Vedantic tradition have done so, and we're very devotional. Yet some students of Vedanta regard talk of God and devotion as dualistic. Now, there's a second part to this question I want to get in, and that is that in Swami's introduction, he alluded to the Mahavakyas, I am that, thou art that, all of this is that. But when you actually look at what that appears to be, it is such an incredible display of intelligence and creativity. Look at a single cell, and it's more complex than Tokyo, and it's able to repair and replicate itself, and we have trillions of them in our one body. So that the creation is just this marvelous thing, awe-inspiring. And it seems a little almost disrespectful to just brush it off as an illusion. If it's an illusion, it's a marvelous illusion. And, and it actually inspires devotion even to contemplate how sublime it is, how miraculous it is. So how would you, let me just throw in one more thing and then I'll finish. Saint Teresa of Avila said that it appears as though God himself is on the journey. So would you agree that the relative creation is not just a quagmire of delusion and suffering that we should try to escape from as soon as possible, but that it has an evolutionary purpose, both for all forms of life and perhaps even for God? And you could go on and elaborate on what you think God is and why the great Vedantic sages spoke so much and so highly of God. This question is for either both of you who want to comment on this.
There are so many questions in there. I don't know which
Sorry about that.
So you started by mentioning my reluctance to, my preference for using the word God, but my reluctance also. It's true, I have a preference for God simply because I'm a closet Sufi, really. But
time to come out of the closet, Rupert.
when when Ellen first met me, or after a short time we had known each other, she said, "You're a Sufi on the inside and a Vedantin on the outside," and it's true. Why am I a little reluctant to speak of God? For obvious reasons. The word God has assumed so many associations. Of course, within the confines of a meeting such as this, where I think probably most people attending are either familiar with Swami's approach or my approach, or both, it's quite safe to use the word God. I would have no reservation for doing so, but wanting to speak about these matters in a way that makes it available, makes this understanding available to a broader audience, I think the word God provokes more resistance than is necessary. So at least to begin with, I would not use the word.
Right, but we know that we're not referring to the big old guy in the sky with the beard here. We're talking about all-pervading intelligence, which is evident in every particle of creation if we look closely enough.
Yes, we're talking about infinite being, infinite aware being, which is the very nature of our self or our being. Is this being evolving? I would suggest not. Any more than in the same way that a screen doesn't evolve during a movie. But is there an evolution or a purpose for an individual, a so-called individual, which as I suggested, is a temporary localization of infinite consciousness? Yes, that there is a purpose. I would suggest a twofold purpose, one relating to an individual's inner life and one relating to their outer life. Their inner life is to find happiness. That's what all individuals are engaged in, more or less constantly, the search for fulfillment, for peace, for happiness, sometimes referred to as enlightenment. So this is the highest desire that anybody ever has, is the desire for happiness. And this I would suggest was an individual's purpose, to recognize their true nature of peace and happiness. What is their outer purpose? It would be to communicate that understanding in some way through their activities and relationships. So first, to recognize the nature of our being, the fact that its nature is peace and happiness, and that it is shared by all people and all things, and then to use one's life, one's faculties, one's inclinations, one's intelligence, one's body to communicate, express, share, celebrate this understanding in whatever way is appropriate for each individual. Swami?
Well, the question of God is a very interesting question when you come to non-duality. One way of understanding non-dualism would be this, that the triangle of God, universe, and us, sentient beings, in Sanskrit, Jiva, Jagat, Ishvara. So that's the triangle of dualistic religion. We have this universe, we are sentient beings, and there is a God which we accept on faith, or at the most on the proof of mystical experience. You may have visions and so on and so forth, or voices. Now, and your relation to this being who is supposed to be omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, is one of devotion, faith, devotion, surrender, worship, and love. Now, from an Advaitic perspective, there is a way, in fact, a highly recommended way in which one can relate to God. The absolute Brahman, or this infinite isness awareness, which is our real nature, appears as us, obviously, as this universe, and as the God of the universe. So what non-dualism says is that this triangle which you find in dualistic religions, universe, God, and individual, there is a deeper reality to this triangle. There is this one uniting non-dual truth which appears as this triangle. So on one hand, when you look at it this way, there's the danger of dismissing God, as you said. So, all right, so this is an appearance. The reality is that non-dual isness, awareness, and I am that, and that's it. That's an immature way of looking at non-dualism. all the great teachers, monks, and spiritual masters I've met, non-dualists, they have always said that you, after the non-dual understanding, you look back upon this universe, you see this entire universe pervaded by that one infinite being, and God is that infinite being. Once you look back upon this universe and you find yourself again back in this form, and you look at you're looking at a universe, God is in fact more real to you. Earlier it was a God of faith. Now it's a God, you know that it exists. It is a reality. So there is a non-dual bhakti, devotion. It's not that devotion is contrary to knowledge. It's not that devotion is contrary to non-dualism. There is a devotion based on faith, which is at the initial level. After enlightenment or after this non-dual understanding, the same devotion remains as a direct appreciation of this God, which is no longer a distant God. The problem with, now let me tell you what the problem is with bringing God into the non-dual conversation. The beauty of the non-dual approach, I'm sure Rupert will agree with me here, is, I mean, what is most directly attractive of the non-dual approach is it's right here. It's you. It's absolutely evident. If you but know what is meant by non-duality, you would see it's an obvious fact. The moment you import the God of dualism into it, with the dualistic presumption of a distant God, a God who is an other, a God who is omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, then it seems to be something different from you. So that is the only problem. But with a mature understanding of non-dualism, there is absolutely no problem in appreciating, loving, worshipping God. In fact, as you said, Shankara and Ramana and Ramakrishna and all the saints and sages of different religions who clearly had a non-dual realization, they were also, in most cases, openly devotional. So they never saw any contradiction at all. I think it's a sign of a mature non-dualist to be full of love and devotion.
Yeah. If God is omnipresent, then he can't be distant from you. And as one teacher said, God may be omnipotent, but the one thing he can't do is remove himself from your heart. Yeah. And you tell the story of someone coming to Ramakrishna and saying, can you show me God? Can I know God? And he said, yes. And he said, do you see God? And he said, yes. You can clean up the story if I've garbled it a little bit. But obviously he was asserting that God can be an experiential, lived reality, whatever God may be. We don't want to take up the entire time talking about that, but
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Rupert.
Just what you said, if God is omniscient, then God cannot be separate from you, separate
if
from
he's omnipresent, yeah.
If omnipresent, if God is omnipresent, there is no room for a you or a me or an us alongside God.
Sure, it's all God.
Separate from God or one with God. Mm-hmm. So if God is omnipresent, and if God is not omnipresent, then God is obviously not God. There is no question of us either being separate from him, if I'm allowed to use the word him, or united with him. There simply is no other self or being than God's being. And God's being, the only being there is, the only self, if we can call it a self, there is the self of ourselves, the self of each person and the being of each thing. And this God's presence shines in each of us as the feeling of being or the knowledge I am before it is qualified by experience. So this sense that everybody, not just those relative few of us who are interested in these matters, but all 7 billion of us have a sense of their own being. What not everybody realizes is that the being that they sense as themselves is God's presence, the only presence or being there is. Why don't we realize it as God's being? Because we allow ourselves to become mixed with or identified with the content of experience. But once our being is divested of all the limitations that it acquires from experience, it shines as the only being there is, the God's presence or God's being. And this is the same being that shines as the isness of all seeming things.
Yeah, Swami Muktananda's slogan was "God dwells within you as you." Any more comments on this topic, Swami?
Can I introduce a question here, which normally Rick does not speak about, but I would like to know his views on this, which is yes, which is dualistic religion. Who, I mean, notice how Rick took it one step. Rick and Rupert, of course. Rupert does not normally speak about this.
Rupert, yes.
Rupert, sorry. Notice how Rupert took the dualistic conception of God, mediated by the omnipresence of God, to the non-dualistic realization. God's being must be my being, which is perfect non-dualism. But there is, and I'm one with Rupert there, absolutely. I mean, I don't disagree one bit. But we must admit there's a vast number of people in this world, not maybe in this audience, but a lot of people who would not want to go so far, who would want to hold on to their individuality and have God as an other, and find some theological way of finding a distinction between God's being and our being, and set up a dualistic, maybe a loving relationship based on faith and surrender and worship to God. So where would Rupert stand on this? Because in classical Advaita-vedanta, there are two ways of dealing with this. One would be that this kind of dualistic devotional practice is helpful ultimately to non-dual realization, which is the real thing. A classical Advaitin would say ultimately you have to come to the realization that I am Brahman, I am the infinite, for enlightenment and liberation. And dualistic worship is a good stepping stone towards that. That's one way of looking at it. There's a more liberal way of looking at it, that Sri Ramakrishna would say, instead of privileging non-dualism above dualism, so these are different approaches and all of them ultimately set you free from samsara. So what would, Rupert, what would you say to that?
I tend to agree with the first approach you just suggested, namely that this dualistic devotion towards God is valuable in that it attenuates the ego. But it does not uproot the ego. In fact, for the ego to be truly uprooted, or it cannot be uprooted because it doesn't really exist as such, for it to be dissolved, this dualistic relationship between self and other, whoever that other is, whether it's a person or a God, must come to an end. So you see, even if we take the dualistic idea of devotion of God, how has it arisen? Let's use the analogy, Swami, that both you and I have used, the analogy of a dream. When we dream, we localize ourselves as a separate subject of experience within our own dream, and we look out at the dreamed world. And the dreamed character feels itself to be small, finite, limited, and indeed a product of the world that it perceives. And because the world it perceives is immense and magnificent, it is quite natural for the so-called individual, the dream character, to ask, what did all this emerge from? Whatever this emerged from must have been prior to and larger than itself. So whatever, and therefore they conceptualize a God that is beyond the universe, prior to, but beyond it and greater than it. So hence this trinity that you suggested, God, the world, and the self. So from this point of view, we enter into a devotional relationship with this marvelous, magnificent, infinite God that is the creator of all of this. But even from that point of view, if the world is created by or emerges out of this magnificent, infinite God at a distance from ourselves, if the world is a creation of that, and we as separate individuals are a creation of the world, then whatever the essence of the world is, God must be the essence of what we are. So even if one follows the the common dualistic idea of self and God. If one follows that all the way, one must inevitably at the end come to the realization that the being that I am is a localization of the only being there is. In other words, in either of these two perspectives, what you and I would consider to be the true non-dual view of God, or the more dualistic view of God, if you go deeply into the dualistic idea of God, that there is only room for one being. There is only room for God's being. So that the dualistic, sooner or later, even if one pursues the dualistic approach, one must come to the realization that there is no other self in me other than God's being. That to me is true devotion to God.
Right. Good. Next question. Okay. This is a question about awareness. A block of text on Rupert's site reads, everything we know is known through awareness. Therefore, our knowledge of anything is only as good as our knowledge of awareness. This question came in from an anonymous questioner who asks, does this quote say anything more than the obvious fact that we can perceive and act because we are conscious? There are experts in every field of human endeavor who know little of awareness, but accomplish amazing things. So, and there are a couple more questions. So I want to dwell on awareness for the next few minutes, but pick it up from that particular question to start with.
Swami, would you like to respond first? Or
all right. I'll start with the tail end of the question, that there are experts in every field who accomplish amazing things. That's true. I mean, from a classical Advaita perspective, in this world of Maya, this world of appearance, you can do amazing things without knowing the ultimate reality of this appearance. You can have technology, you can have science, you can have medicine. All of that can be done, right? And art, and everything is possible without knowing the root of things. But notice there is a limit. We do not know the answer to the ultimate questions of what is all this? What am I really? And also, there is always this nagging problem of suffering. Even with all the marvelous things that we can do in science and technology and art and even religion. So in all of this, there still remains lack of fulfillment, the lack of answers to ultimate questions. So those are answered only when you probe deeply into it. Notice, even in science, our deepest question, we live in a world of modern science, so we have to take a look at that. And I'm not trained in physics, or I'm not a scientist, but I can't help but noticing that even in this determined quest for a solution to the riddle of the universe in material terms only, we've just ended up with paradoxes. I mean, scientists could explain this better, but there doesn't seem to be any solution coming up at all. So we are ultimately thrown back upon the one which is experiencing all this. As Rupert says, upon awareness. Let me give you an example. We have here, the senior most member in our ashram is Bill Conrad, who's 96 years old and still going strong. He is a veteran of the Second World War and a physicist by training. And he has a question. He says, you see that everything appears to awareness and there's no proof of anything apart from awareness. So I can suggest a scientific experiment to prove you wrong, Swami. Let's put up a, let's put up a camera in this room and leave the room, let the video camera keep recording. Then we come back into the room and we play the recording and we see nobody was in the room, at least no conscious being. And this room existed. The film shows that the room existed even when we were not in the room. So doesn't it prove that things can exist? So my answer to him was, Bill, notice that you see the room in your awareness, you propose the experiment in your awareness, and you are aware of the camera being set up and you're aware of us leaving the room. In your awareness, we come back into the room. In your awareness, we look into the film of the camera, and in your awareness, we come to the conclusion that there must be something other than awareness. It's still in your awareness. At no point did we step outside your awareness. And to make the point even more clear, I said to him, is it entirely impossible that this could all be in a dream? Could you dream that you are setting up an experiment and leaving the room and recording an empty room, coming back and deciding that the room exists by itself, and the next moment wake up and say the whole thing was in the dreamer's mind? He had to say, on principle, it is possible. So ultimately, everything that is going on is only in awareness. And once one begins to understand this, one sees it's an obvious fact. Why did I never see this earlier? And the implications of this are tremendous, even for science, even for technology, even for art. What is it that is doing science, technology, and art? We do not know. It is only awareness which is doing it, and it has meaning. It has existence only because awareness is. It is appreciated. We are aware of science and technology and art only because of awareness, and we appreciate the beauty in science and art again because of awareness. So I would totally agree with Rupert when he says that it all comes back to awareness.
And just to elaborate on that, I'm going to respond to the first part of the question, Rick, because Swami addressed the latter part of it. I think you started with the question started with a quote from my website saying our knowledge of reality is only as good as the mind through which it is known.
Only as good as our knowledge of awareness.
Is only as good as our knowledge of awareness. Is only, yes. Let me change that slightly. Our knowledge of reality or the universe is only as good as our knowledge of the mind through which it is known. Why? Because everything that the mind knows, and all that is known of the universe is known by our mind, is filtered through the limitations of that mind. So in the same way that if one looks at snow through orange tinted glasses, the snow will appear in accordance with the limitations of the medium, the glasses, through which one looks, and the white snow will appear orange. Of course, the one wearing glasses has been wearing them all day, so no longer realizes that they are wearing glasses, and they believe that the snow is orange. No, the snow has no color of its own. It appears orange because of the medium through which it is being perceived. Now, the medium through which we perceive the universe is called the mind, which consists of perception and thought. So how do we know that the universe that we perceive, this multiplicity and diversity of objects appearing in time and space, is not simply a reification, an objectivization of the limitations of our own mind? In other words, that our own mind superimposes its own limitations on reality, which, divested of those limitations, is infinite or unlimited. We don't know that. How could we ever? Does this mean that it is not possible to know the nature of reality? Does this mean that our knowledge of reality will always be tainted with the limitations of the mind? No, because if the mind investigates itself and discovers what its own essential nature is prior to its limitations, that is the one knowledge that the mind is that is possible, that is not subject to the limitations of the mind. In other words, when the mind is divested of all its limitations, its unlimited essence or reality shines. And so, in other words, our knowledge, the mind's knowledge of its own essence, awareness, is the only knowledge there is that is not tainted by, and as such, an expression of the mind's limitations. And therefore, it is reasonable to conclude from this that the only knowledge there is that is not inherently limited by the mind is the knowledge of awareness. Awareness is knowledge of itself. And that is the only absolute knowledge there is. By absolute in this context, I mean the only knowledge there is that is not relative to the limitations of the mind through which it is perceived. And there is no need to posit, as Swami said very, very nicely in his introduction, that there is no other reality in the ocean other than water. There is a single reality. Well, we know, even if from the point of view where we consider ourselves to be a product of the universe, if we are a product of the universe, then the essence of ourselves must be the essence of that which we are a product of. So all we need to do in order to know the ultimate reality of the universe is to know the ultimate reality of ourselves. And if we do that, if we trace back our experience through all the layers of relative knowledge and experience, we arrive at this, the knowledge of our essential being, the awareness is knowledge of itself, which must therefore be the absolute reality of the universe.
Swami, do you want to comment on
that? Can I just make a comment on that?
Yeah.
Yes. And I totally agree with what Rupert just said. I was just hearing in my head voices of different scientists I've come across, physicists, mathematicians, and neuroscientists especially. And they have a chorus of protest because of a misunderstanding. They seem to feel that we are invalidating science. No, what Rupert just says does not invalidate science. Within a relative sphere, in the sphere of appearance, even without knowing the ultimate reality, science works. So at no point does advaita or non-dualism ever contradict science. So you can do science without being a non-dualist. You can do science by being a realist and a materialist too, and it will work. Only thing is, there'll be two problems. One is you will not answer the ultimate questions of what really ultimately all this is. You never get to an answer to that. You will end up with paradoxes, whatever your discipline. Mathematics ends with Gödel's paradoxes. Now I'm entering into dangerous territory, which I'm not an expert on. Physics, I understand, is at the heart of physics lies some terrible paradoxes today. And neuroscience ends up with the hard problem of consciousness. So you will not come to a final deep understanding of what's going on here. That'll be one problem. The second problem is you will not solve the problem of suffering and ultimate meaning of life. That can only be answered by knowing the nature of awareness, that we are this unlimited being awareness.
Can I just add something to that? Just follow on from that, Swami, that this objection that you raise on behalf of a chorus of scientists and neurologists, and that we are invalidating science. On the contrary, what we're speaking of is the ultimate science. Unless we understand the nature of the mind through which all knowledge takes place, we cannot possibly expect to know anything about the objects of knowledge. So unless we know the nature of the mind, all science is the activity of mind. It is a series of perceptions and a series of thoughts. It is the activity of a human mind. So unless a scientist knows the nature of the mind through which all knowledge of the universe is known, we cannot be sure that our knowledge of the universe is any more than a reification of the limitations of our own mind. Therefore, if we want to know anything about the nature of the universe, we first must know the nature of that through which the universe is known. So we are not invalidating science, we are upgrading science. We are making the very obvious point that if you want to know the nature of the universe, it is necessary to first know the nature of the mind through which it is known. Our knowledge of the universe appears in accordance with our knowledge of the mind through which it is known. So I would suggest that what we are speaking of is the ultimate science. It is not an invalidation of science. It is the science upon which all other sciences must be based.
Yeah, I would say we're kind of rescuing science, since the materialist paradigm is the predominant one in the world, and it would seem that that paradigm, the predominance of it, has had disastrous consequences in so many ways. And this leads into a question from Anil Mathur in Canada, who asks, how do we know that the awareness we feel is a reflection of our true self, existence, consciousness, bliss, and not just a product of the brain? Since someone, you or Swami, just alluded to neuroscience and the hard problem, it was the Swami. And I would say, we can expand this question a bit. Can materialism and its subtler form, panpsychism, be empirically disproven? And then there are all these other sort of isms, idealism and panentheism and so on, that people debate over. How do you and someone else in a different question asked, where do you see non-duality going in the next 50 or 100 years? And that might weave into this one, which is that you feel that non-duality, if it's coming into its heyday, will help to reshuffle these perspectives and paradigms until eventually we'll no longer live in an age where an erroneous perspective, such as materialism, can have such dominance. Both of you can address this.
Do you want me to go first?
Either way.
No.
Okay. Yeah, this is something that I find interesting, because I've met David Chalmers here, who is here at the NYU. He's the head of the Mind, Brain, Consciousness unit here. And he's the one who coined the very popular term now, the hard problem of consciousness. He advocates panpsychism. So now there are two ways of going about it. One way is to show that in the hard problem of consciousness and panpsychism, as David Chalmers is putting it, is not the ultimate solution. It's not at all what Advaita-Vedanta is saying. Advaita goes much deeper. Another way, which I prefer, is to take what we are given by, say, neuroscientists right now, or by philosophers of the mind like David Chalmers right now, and then see what further steps we can take to reach the Advaitic or non-dualistic understanding of consciousness. So that second approach is, I'll just outline what I feel about it. Recently, Christoph Koch, who is the chief scientist of the Paul Allen Brain Institute, he launched his new book, The Feeling of Life Itself. So now it's an online event nowadays, like everything else. It was the Harvard bookstore. And I was very interested to see that here is this person who's studying consciousness entirely from the perspective of the brain, of course, neuroscience. But now there are these, I noted a few things he said. First, very encouraging. He said that consciousness is most important. There's nothing as important as consciousness. And I was thinking, well, we have come a long way. There was 20, 25 years ago, there was nobody who was seriously interested at all in consciousness in the sciences, even in brain science also. They were dismissive of the whole thing. And now here is a leading neuroscientist in the world, one of them, saying that consciousness is the most valuable thing in the entire universe. Because he says that suppose you give me $1 billion and tell me that, Christoph, you have to give up your consciousness and you can live as a zombie, your body will be fine, your brain will be fine, everything goes on, but you just are not conscious at all, and we'll give you $1 billion. I'd say, no, it has no meaning for me if I'm not conscious. So consciousness is the most important thing in all of the universe. That is a big takeaway, and we would agree, non-dualism would agree with him there. Second, he is working with Tononi, developing this theory called the integrated information theory, where one takeaway is that consciousness is everywhere. So that's a huge, huge step forward. It's still something materialistic from their perspective, but it's everywhere now, especially in all living beings. Again, a huge step forward from the time just 20, 25 years ago, where people said consciousness, whatever it is, scientists would say it's only in, human beings or higher primates like us, not even lower animals. Now all animals, all living cells, and he was even saying even non-living beings might have a base level of consciousness. So that's another encouraging takeaway. The third encouraging takeaway from him was this very study of consciousness, because he says, I am a conscious being, and the study of consciousness showing that it is everywhere has transformed my personal life, which was a very interesting thing that I noted. It has to transform your personal life if it's a genuine quest into consciousness. He says, I have over time become a vegetarian. I can't kill an insect now because, as he said, this insect represents a tiny flash of consciousness. You know, the two bookends of eternal darkness before, eternal darkness afterwards. There's a little flash of consciousness in little insect's life. So how can I kill it? Advaita would not agree there, but Advaita would say, good, you're on the right track. What more needs to be done? So from this, the next step would be to ask this question about the hard problem of consciousness. So how can a material objective entity like the brain produce consciousness? That's the basic thing of the hard problem of consciousness. And it is interesting. I posed this question to him, to Christoph, and he immediately rejected it. He said, we can't do that. The same thing which I was saying earlier, the chorus of protest. If we accept the hard problem of consciousness and take it as a genuine question, then we can't do brain science. And our answer, I'm sure Rupert would agree, is that you can do brain science, but you have to accept the hard problem of consciousness. Otherwise, the brain science won't get you anywhere ultimately. So hard problem of consciousness shows you that the brain itself is not producing, not that its consciousness is produced. Then the next step would be to see that consciousness is not an object. It's not part of the material universe. So this is where panpsychism, where someone like David Chalmers says that consciousness is everywhere. But what he basically means is that everywhere exists, there's a material universe, and somehow consciousness is in and through everything there. Big step forward again, but still, that's not quite right. Consciousness is not an object out there. You are consciousness. It is the pure subject in which the entire universe appears. And we will say ultimately the entire universe is not different from consciousness. So this ultimate subjective nature of consciousness, quite different from a thing out there. There are many things out there, and now we are talking about this wonderful thing called consciousness out there. No, from there you have to take one more step. So we have left Christoph Koch far behind. We have now leaving David Chalmers also behind. But this is the next step where scientists and philosophers of mind must confront this. Recently, I got had the privilege of spending a year as a fellow at Harvard University. So one thing I took up was a course in the philosophy of mind. And I noted that the philosophy of mind as it stands now, I think Descartes was the last person who said anything impressive in the philosophy of mind, more than 300 years ago. And the last 100 years, if you look at all the papers, we did a survey of all the papers, important papers. It's one group of philosophers is saying that consciousness and mind, they don't distinguish. Consciousness and mind are nothing but either the brain or language. It's just an illusion created by language. You might say that's ridiculous, but this seriously, very smart people are seriously trying to say that. Or it's an illusion created by behavior. So somehow trying to dismiss mind and consciousness, bring it down to some physical basis. And another group of philosophers like Thomas Nagel or Jackson or John Searle giving various thought experiments to show, guys, this doesn't work. You can't reduce mind and consciousness to this. So the philosophy of mind, I'm saying, is stalled. As Rupert was saying, without that ultimate science of consciousness, you will not get an answer. So there, from a pure subjective nature of consciousness, and then ultimately, the entire physical objective universe, what is its relation to this pure subjective consciousness? That it is nothing other than that pure subjective consciousness appearing as an other. So that's the pathway I see before us, going from present neuroscience to the non-dual understanding of consciousness. Yeah.
Rupert, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, just a couple of things. This, the prevailing understanding of consciousness in philosophy of mind circles that you mentioned, Swami, these many of these ideas that you mentioned go back to Thomas Nagel's definition in the, I think it was sometime in the 70s, when he suggested that an entity can be considered to be conscious if there was something it was like to be that entity. In other words, if that entity had the experience of being myself. Well, a table obviously doesn't have the experience of being myself, and therefore a table is not conscious. A tree does not have the experience of being myself, and therefore that object is not conscious. However, a bat or a dog or a cat has the experience of being myself, although it of course doesn't conceptualize that experience, and therefore the bat, the dog, the cat can be considered to be conscious. This is the fundamental misunderstanding upon which all these other ideas that you referred to, Swami, are based, and it is based on a misunderstanding about ourselves, namely that I, as a human being, am conscious or have consciousness. This is the fundamental presumption that informs this definition of consciousness and all the ideas, the hard problem of consciousness and everything that comes from it. That consciousness is a property of a human being. It is something we have. And this is the fundamental misunderstanding. It is not, obviously tables, chairs, trees are not conscious, but I would suggest that dogs and cats and bats are not conscious. I would suggest that human beings are not conscious or aware. Only awareness is aware. Our knowledge that we are aware is not the knowledge that a person has about awareness. Awareness is knowledge of itself, because awareness is the only one that is aware. Therefore, awareness is the only one that can know anything about itself, or indeed about anything else. So the knowledge of being myself, in other words, the knowledge of being, is consciousness's knowledge of itself. It is not the knowledge that a human being has about themselves. Humans are not aware. Only awareness is aware. And that must be, to go right the way back to the first statement you made, I think, Rick, at the beginning of this last question. You said, how do we know that our awareness is not a reflection of I think that's what you said, not a reflection of the infinite awareness. Our awareness is not a reflection of infinite awareness. The awareness with which each of us is currently aware of our experience is infinite consciousness. That the space that exists, there are however many of us, how many are we, 650 or so. There are 650 people gathered together. We're all sitting in different rooms. The space in each of our rooms is not a reflection of, or a byproduct of, or a part of the space of the universe. There are no parts to the space in the universe. It's a single, unmodified, undivided whole. So the space in each of our rooms is the infinite, or relatively speaking, the infinite space of the universe. The awareness, the very awareness with which each of us is now aware of this conversation is infinite awareness, the only awareness there is, albeit channeled through the localized perspective of a finite mind. So that's one thing I would just like to add to what you said, Swami, and just very briefly about where non-duality is going. You spoke, Swami, about where it might go in scientific and philosophy of mind circles. So I'd like to say something about the other end of the spectrum, to regular people like us. I'm sure there are plenty of philosophers and scientists here, but the people, most people who are interested in these matters, not from a philosophy or scientific point of view, but simply that they're interested in peace, in happiness, in love, in how to live. These are not just the relatively few philosophers and scientists. This is all 7 billion of us, all 7 billion of us are interested above all else in happiness. Not everybody is interested in enlightenment, but everybody is interested in happiness. And it's basically the same interest. And I feel that the future of non-duality is that through numerous different channels, such as this, the non-dual understanding, which was once encoded in esoteric language and enshrined in ashrams and monasteries, is now being made available really for the first time to everybody. I feel that this is the age of the direct path, and that everybody, simply by virtue of the fact that they love happiness, is ready for this understanding and is quite capable of understanding it. And so I feel that this is the time when this understanding should be tailored and made available in simple, clear, ordinary language, and that these very simple, experiential, direct pathways be made available so that everyone can experience for themselves that the nature of their own being is happiness, and they share their being with everyone and everything.
I'm glad you brought up direct path. Oh, Swami, did you want to add?
I know where you're leading with that, but before that, just a couple of observations. Yes, I totally agree with Rupert. And I just wanted to say a couple of things which I was reminded of when you said it was esoteric knowledge limited only to a few people. So I was reminded of Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda. He said his mission was to bring Vedanta from the forests to the cities. And the other thing that we can all do it, as he says, Ramana Maharshi, it seems that somebody asked him, am I qualified for non-dualism? And you know, Ramana Maharshi's famous approach was, you find out who I am. So that he would throw the question back to the questioner and say, find out who is asking who I am. So Ramana Maharshi said, did you say I? Did you use the word I? Then you are qualified. If you say I, then you're qualified to ask who I am, and you're qualified for non-dualism. Absolutely.
Good. There's quite a lot of interest in the chat about the direct versus progressive paths. And first I'll make a statement, I'll quote a statement from Harish Punjabi, who basically said that, in his opinion, direct and progressive paths are not opposed to one another, but are applicable to seekers at different levels of their development. And he said, I hope Rupert and Swami will connect their discussion to Kashmir Shaivism, which we've already sort of done, but because he appreciates that path. But then there's a longer question, which will flesh this out a bit, from Dean Slider in Santa Monica. He's a friend of mine. Some advocates of the progressive path say that those on the direct path indulge in wishful thinking. They may attain some fragile intellectual insight, but it lacks the experiential substantiality that can only come from years of culturing the vehicle, the body, mind, spirit. Meanwhile, advocates of the direct path say that advocates of the gradual path needlessly perpetuate the illusion of duality by supposing that the goal lies on the far side of elaborate practice, chasing the dangling carrot, as the phrase goes. They prevent themselves from seeing that it's the inescapable nature of their own present awareness right now. In fact, they charge that spiritual practices on the progressive path actually reinforce the separate self or ego. And so remember, Harish's comment was, this is actually not an argument. Perhaps these two paths each have their role to play. So both of you, please comment on that.
Rupert, would you like to go first?
Can you ever imagine a presidential debate where one of the candidates says to the other after him, would you like to go first?
Don't worry, he's going to start shouting at you as you speak.
Yes. I don't see any reason to pit the direct path against the progressive path, or to say which one is better or superior. Or one is by definition direct, one is by definition indirect or progressive. That's not a qualitative statement, it's just a fact. I would suggest to anyone who was considering some kind of pathway to happiness or enlightenment that they choose the path which seems to them to be the easiest, the most enjoyable, and the most efficient. Whatever that is for each person. If for some people, as a result of that, those criteria, they choose to embark on a progressive or indirect path, I would never dissuade them from doing so. On the contrary, I would encourage them to do so. If someone had been on a progressive path for many years, as indeed I was before coming across the direct path, and felt some frustration with it, that they had got somehow to the limit of their practice and their understanding, as indeed I did, then I would recommend exploring this approach. But I would never suggest that one was better or senior to the other. And just to be, I think most people here are familiar with these terms, but they're very, very briefly, I just want to give an analogy to make it very clear about the distinction between these two parts. And I'm going to use one of my favorite analogies, the actor John Smith, who plays the role of King Lear. John Smith leads a peaceful, happy life at home. He assumes the character of King Lear and becomes miserable because of his troubles with his daughter and his kingdom, etc. So the actor John Smith loses himself completely in the character that he's playing, King Lear, and as a result, he becomes miserable. Now, as the character King Lear, he can do all sorts of things to regain his happiness. He can try to improve his relationship with his daughters. He can try to improve his relationship with his government, with the war with the French. That's one way he can manipulate his activities and relationships. He can adopt various activities in order to find peace and happiness. Or that's the indirect path. You go via some kind of objective experience. You give your attention to an activity, a relationship, an object, a substance. You direct your attention towards something objective for the purpose of finding happiness. The direct path, using the analogy of King Lear and John Smith, would be for King Lear not to attend to his relationship with his daughters, his kingdom, the French, etc., but rather to explore who he is. Remember, who he really is John Smith, and John Smith is perfectly peaceful and happy. So this would be the direct path, where King Lear doesn't give his attention to his thoughts, his feelings, his activities, his relationships. He gives his attention to himself. He travels back through the layers of his experience until this recognition, I am John Smith, takes place. And the moment the recognition, I am John Smith, takes place, his innate peace and happiness is restored. That is that's the direct approach. It is said to be direct because we go directly from wherever we are in experience to the source of peace and happiness, that is our being. We don't go via an object, a mantra, the flame, the breath, the guru, etc.
Swami?
Yes, I'm glad this subject has come up. And let me just say, this whole thing about science and consciousness studies and all, I regard it as a diversion because the path of non-dual Vedanta or Advaita, it is far more ancient than our modern scientific endeavors, and it worked at that time without any kind of modern science, and it still works by itself without any reference to modern science. Just that we live in an age of modern science, so it's good to deal with those questions. But here now we are talking about the very heart of non-dualism. The terms direct path and progressive path do not come up in classical literature of Advaita Vedanta. but that does not mean that they are not valid. There is something to these categories. Um, the path of the progressive path would include, as the questionnaire said, culture of the vehicle. They consist in repetition and discipline, the actual practice. So for example, it could be a practice of meditation, where you try to still the mind with the help of any number of meditation techniques. Or it could be the culture of regular worship of a deity, cultivating an attitude of love and devotion and service. And it could be an activity of moral and ethical training, basically the whole very important business of becoming a better human being. All of these are part of what is called the progressive path. And notice all of them, they demand consistent effort, they demand repetition, they demand discipline, and they talk about progress, better and better. You're doing better than you were doing earlier. Your mind is calmer than it used to be earlier. You actually genuinely feel more and more attachment to God than you used to earlier. So there is a progress. And at the end of it is set up a goal. It could be a mystical vision, or it could be a feeling of union. It could be an overcoming of smallness, expanding out. Different kinds of achievement are put up at the end of this long and arduous path. So that's how a lot of the spiritual journey is understood, and a lot of the literature in different religions talks about that. Now, I would give some special emphasis on the direct path. The path of knowledge or non-dualism is basically a direct path. It's important to emphasize that because it's so little known and little understood. It's so different from what we are normally used to. It talks about the goal as not being something distant from us. It's not a heaven we have to go to. It's not something far away in time. You know, you have to wait until death and then you see God. Or you have to wait until the coming of the Messiah or something and then you get salvation. Not something distant from you in time. So not something distant from you in space or time. Not something distant from you in object. That means it's not a separate thing apart from you. Rather, the direct path says that what we are seeking for is everywhere, and especially it's here, is all the time, and especially now, and is nothing else other than you. So it directs our attention back to our immediate experience, here, now, and ourselves. And then begins to take us to an experience of, to notice our body and then the mind and the deeper and deeper levels of our awareness, till we see that the whole thing is an appearance in awareness and that we are awareness itself. And notice that this awareness is free of all the troubles, all the problems that you are trying to overcome. And it's constantly available. Another thing is the direct path does not depend on either faith or mystical experience. These I'm telling you the unique features of the direct path. Religion or spirituality has been taught in these different ways. One is the commonly known approach of faith. There is something which is revealed to you in the holy books, or the spiritual master reveals to you the existence of God, and you have to believe in it and you have to worship, and this is the way. This is one path, the path of faith and belief. In fact, in America, religion is called faith. That's the word. And faith is one thing that really does not apply to something like the direct path or non-dualism. The other path is the path of mystical experience. I hope Rupert will comment on that too. A lot of spirituality is about having extraordinary mystical experiences. So they may have their own value, but again, the direct path says not a question of belief, not a question of having extraordinary experiences, but what we have right here and right now, what everybody has all the time. For example, the experience of being awake, of dreaming, of sleeping, that's enough. If you have experienced being awake and dream and sleep, that's enough to begin with. An investigation of that will reveal to you the ultimate reality about yourself. And experience of our physical being. Do you experience being a body, the vital being of the breath, or the mental being of the mind, or the intellect, or the blankness beyond that? subtler and subtler, more inward and inward, and then we come to the consciousness itself, not as an object, but as the one to which all of this appears. So my point is, there are unique features of the direct path, not faith, not mystical experience, but an inquiry into the always available ordinary experience of life. So I think we need to stress, as Rupert, of course, has been doing all through, the unique features of the direct path. Having said that, again, are they in conflict? No, they are not in conflict. Often many teachers who in the modern West talk about the direct path have themselves, as indeed has Rupert, gone through a long and arduous process of training in the so-called progressive path, discipline and repetition and deepening. There is a text, and I'll stop with this. There is an ancient text about 700 years old in Sanskrit, Jivan Mukti Viveka, an inquiry into the enlightened while living. And there they talk about something analogous to the direct and the progressive paths. They say there's the progressive path. You purify, the internal purification, devotional worship of God, and concentrated meditation. Finally, cultivation of the path of Advaita-vedanta leading to enlightenment. And that's what they call the standard approach. There's a Sanskrit term for that. Literally, Kritopasti literally means one who has completed the course of worship. And they come to enlightenment, and it's done. But they also admit that there are many cases in which, for some reason, even without completing deep purification of the mind, even without completing perfect meditation, one can actually come into enlightenment, the realization that I am being awareness, limitless being awareness. So they call them akritopasti, not having completed the course of worship. And then they say, very interesting observation. So this thing was known in this form, it was known to ancient India. And they say that what happens, such people, they may face trouble. They are enlightened and they are guaranteed freedom. They know that they are free anyway. But in the day-to-day living, the manifestation of the excellences, of the ethical excellence, the unfettered love, the ability to live life in accordance with the realization, that depends upon a certain discipline and preparation of the vessel, as it were. That if that has not been done, they recommend, right after that intuition, a further intense effort at the progressive path, but now in a very different way. Earlier, it was like an effort to come to enlightenment. Now you have got enlightenment. Now you are awakened. But now you need to clear out the blockages so that there's a fuller manifestation. Nothing more needs to be done for your awakening. Nothing more needs to be done for your enlightenment. But for the manifestation of that enlightenment in the ordinary business of living, the same old practices of the progressive path are very helpful. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Swami. I was just about to add exactly what you've just said, so I don't need to say very much about it, except just to endorse what you've said, that there's often a common misunderstanding, in contemporary non-dual circles, that that one who is engaged in the direct path can dispense with the need to, as Dean said in his question, cultivate the vehicle, attend to one's thoughts, one's feelings, one's activities, one's behavior, one's relationships. That all of that is dispensed with. One can just go directly to one's being, and anybody in any state of mind can go directly to their being, for the reason that you quoted Ramana Maharshi saying, anybody that says I has a knowledge of themselves. All they need to do is go to that I. So that is the direct path. And for one who has not, a nice traditional phrase that you use, Swami, completed the preparatory process, the purification of the mind and the body, which was traditionally considered to be a necessary prelude to entering into the final stage of the practice, which is the return to the source. in the direct path, what is often not made clear nowadays is that if one takes the direct path and neglects the vehicle, it needs to be attended to afterwards. It's what Francis once referred to as post-enlightenment sadhana. It's a rather exotic term. It's exactly as you described, Swami. It's just the practice, for want of a better word, the exploration, the investigation, the practice that we engage in after the nature of our being has become clear to us, in which we make a conscious effort to realign not just the way we think, but the way we feel the body, the way we perceive the world, and the way we act and relate in the world with this new enlightened understanding. Whether one attends to the vehicle, for want of a better term, before, during, and after, but before or after this recognition, it doesn't really matter. For the full, what is really referred to in the traditions as self-realization, not just the glimpse of our true nature, but the establishment in the peace of our true nature and the realignment of all aspects of our life with that understanding, then either before or after one has to attend to the vehicle, the body, the mind, activities, relationships, etc.
Ken Wilber speaks of waking up, cleaning up, and growing up. And he speaks
Yes.
of lines of development and how, we have all these different lines of development and how they can get really out of correlation with each other. And you really need to sort of bring them all along, which is essentially what you're saying. It's just
Yes, I once
terminology.
heard at a SAN conference, I think you were probably there,
Mhm.
Rick, maybe also you, Swami, somebody quoted, I don't know who it was, once the journey to God comes to an
Yes.
end, the journey in God begins. And the journey to God has an ending, but the journey in God doesn't have an ending. It goes on forever.
That's a great quote.
I remember Swami Brahmananda, one of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, made this enigmatic statement. He said spiritual life really begins after Nirvikalpa Samadhi. That's
Yes.
puzzled so many people. They thought that Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the highest state of mystic absorption, is the final thing. What else could be there after that? No, he said that after that it becomes real. He didn't explain. He just said it really begins after Nirvikalpa
Yes.
Samadhi.
Yes, I like that. I had never heard that. I sometimes suggest that if the spiritual journey, for want of a better phrase, was a book written in 12 chapters, that the recognition of our true nature takes place at the end of chapter 1 or possibly the end of chapter 2. There are still many chapters left, this realignment process.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
One interesting anecdote. I heard this from a very old Vedanta teacher. He was this monk who passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 105. So he told me that when he was a novice, he used to go to this great scholar of Vedanta in Calcutta from the monastery. He would journey to attend classes and come back. And one day he saw this scholar studying a new book, this ancient scholar, very old scholar. And this Swami, at that time a novice, he asked him, "Sir, you are so learned. Are you still reading new books?" And the scholar told him that if I don't learn something new every day, there's no purpose of me living. And this novice, the Swami said, I was so impressed. I came back to the monastery, and there was this old monk who would sit there, who was blind, and I would enter the monastery, and he would ask me, "What did the scholar teach you today? What did the Pandit say? What did the Pandit say?" And I would have to narrate the day's lessons to him. So that day, he asked, "What did the Pandit say?" And I said, "Well, I saw that he was reading something new, and I asked him, he said, if I don't learn something new every day, there is no purpose to my living." And this old blind monk said, "Ah, that's a good ideal for a scholar. But remember, in enlightenment, it's once forever. Once you make the breakthrough, that stays forever." So this is what I want to take away. There is an aspect to it, and Rupert would entirely agree that there is this breakthrough which is effortlessly there once you see it. On top of that, you play various the melodies of spiritual development and insight, which keep on coming after that.
Yeah. Rupert used to be a ceramic artist, and if we could for the sake of this metaphor, if we could say that clay never improves, clay is clay, I'm sure that his pottery, the works of art that he created, continued to evolve throughout his career as a ceramic artist. And and actually, I wanted to ask you to comment, Swami, on Vyavaharika Satyam, transactional reality. And clay and pots is one of the analogies used to illuminate that point. So maybe you could just bring that in.
Yes. So this is a reference to the theory of the two levels of truth. Paramarthika, absolute truth, and Vyavaharika, transactional relative truth. This you find in Mahayana Buddhism and Advaita-Vedanta. Nagarjuna, the great Buddhist philosopher, he said that the Buddha had taught two truths, absolute truth and relative truth. The question might be, if there is an absolute truth, let's go to it. What's the point of relative truth or lower truth? And Nagarjuna says nobody goes to the absolute truth except through the lower truth, the relative truth. So the relative truth is very important. The Vyavaharika, he used the term samvritti. In Advaita, we use Vyavaharika. Vyavaharika simply means transactional, empirical, which you deal with in day-to-day life. So all of this, including our discussion of direct path and non-dualism, all of this would be regarded as this Vyavaharika, the transactional world we live in. This is the world of the jewels, the necklace and the bracelet and so on and so forth, the pottery, the various kinds of pots and jars and so on and so forth. But underlying right here, underlying all of this is the very substance or the reality of this, which is the absolute truth, which is pure being, pure, the unlimited isness awareness, the clay of the potteries, if you will, the gold of the jewelry, or the dreamer's mind in and through the dream. The importance, the transactional realm has its own importance, both for our secular life and especially for our spiritual life. So all practices, common sense, our day-to-day dealings, all of them, they can continue and they must continue. After all, even an enlightened being from an external point of view, and even an enlightened being eats and walks and talks and appears to be embodied. From the enlightened being's perspective, there's only infinite isness awareness. See, it's not all that difficult. Once you are aware that gold is the reality or clay is the reality, it doesn't prevent you from seeing the necklace as a necklace, or the bracelet as a bracelet, or a beautiful pot as a pot. You can see it as a pot, you can use the name pot, and you can use it as a pot too, but you know it's clay. So in the same way, there is this relative realm which you realize is nothing other than that ultimate reality appearing in all of these ways. And then your behavior always in the relative realm, but it is informed by, illumined by, lit up by your realization that all of this is nothing but that unlimited isness awareness. Is that what you were asking?
Pretty much. Yeah, Rupert, you want to?
Sorry, I just add here. One of the courses that I was privileged to attend was Professor Garfield's course at Harvard University on Indo-Tibetan Madhyamika Buddhism. And we were introduced to a debate which lasted nearly 500 years in Tibet between the relative positions, the positions of the ultimate truth and the relative truth. 500 years, very intricate texts. One group of lamas giving excessive importance to the ultimate truth. The other group of lamas giving more importance to the relative truth. And this push and pull between them, it's apparently, you cannot resolve it. It's very subtle, and the debate goes to very subtle realms. If you give too much importance to the absolute, what they found was there is a laxity and relaxation at the level, moral laxity at the level, relative level, laxity of discipline, and ultimately the ultimate truth is not attained. That's the problem. If you give too much emphasis to the relative truth, what happens is the ultimate truth becomes a distant, unattainable, future reality, abstract, and we become materialist almost. Yeah, I'll stop there.
I think the reason why this debate went on for 500 years and was still not resolved after all that time was because it's not possible to resolve this debate. The absolute truth, sometimes we hear phrases, and I use this phrase sometimes, from the perspective of the absolute truth, or from the relative truth. This is a misnomer, really. It is not possible to speak of the absolute truth. If we wanted to speak the absolute truth, we should remain silent. And in other words, all expressions, however absolute they may seem to be, however top of the mountain they may seem to be, make some concession to the relative point of view. And this is unavoidable. If we want to speak of the absolute truth, we should remain silent. And many people don't realize that, in fact, Ramana Maharshi's ultimate teaching was not self-inquiry. His ultimate teaching was to sit in silence with the people who came to him. That was his preferred method of teaching, which is not really a method, of course. He rather reluctantly, after many years, started formulating his understanding for those that were not sufficiently mature to simply sit with him in silence and recognize their being. So to help them, he elaborated, first of all, the path of self-inquiry, which was the path that he spontaneously engaged in when as a 16-year-old, he became overcome by the fear of death. And then if they were not able to, if self-inquiry seemed to be too difficult or too abstract, he would elaborate other methods for them. But his preferred way, the most accurate way he felt to transmit his understanding was to sit in silence. So I think it's very important to acknowledge, and of course I know you do, Swami, that any conversation we have about these matters is by definition tainted with the limitations of the mind, and therefore cannot be accurate. As long as we realize that, there's nothing wrong with talking about these matters. We either agree to talk about them in using these rather clumsy symbols of words, or, as indeed some people do, we decide not to speak about them and remain silent.
I'd just like to add to that yes, there's this ancient hymn, the Dakshinamurti Stotram, which says that the teaching is in silence and the doubts of the disciples are dissolved. One step below the peak of silence is the language of the Upanishads, for example. Upanishads are language. That's the dilemma of these texts, that they have to express in language what cannot be expressed in language. So that's why they use language, paradoxical language. They use the language of negation. If you cannot say what it is, we can at least say what it is not. Or they use paradoxical language like farther than the farthest, and nearer than the nearest, greater than the greatest, smaller than the smallest, things like that. Yeah.
Here are two questions on the same topic. The first is from Desmond. The guru, whom I think Rupert referred to as his first teacher, stated that there are some people who sincerely believe they have fully realized their true self, but in due course they realize their error and continue letting go of impediments. And then the second question on the same topic, from Manfred Kirchgarten in Freiburg, Germany. Does the non-dual teaching address the need of receiving a confirmation from a teacher that an authentic realization of one's true nature has taken place, even though it should be self-evident to itself? I'm referring to the 10th person in Swamiji's story of the monks crossing a river, and to Rupert's metaphor of John Smith and King Lear. Both John Smith and the 10th person will undoubtedly know that they know, but in the case of awakening, can one delude oneself into believing one is awakened when one isn't?
All right, let me just go ahead and I'll just make a couple of comments here. One is that it is self-evident. That's the most important thing. It is unmistakable. There is a breakthrough which is unmistakable, self-evident. Some of the characteristics are it becomes effortless. It's not that you are continuously thinking of it, that I am the limitless, or I am Brahman, or Atman, something like that. You're not thinking of it all the time. No more than I'm thinking of I am Sarvapriyananda all the time. but it's always available to me. If you ask me who you are, I would say I'm Sarvapriyananda. In the same way, an enlightened person would um, readily know, effortlessly, it would be available to him or her. That's one thing. But is there a possibility of being deluded into thinking that one is enlightened? There is. That's why it's good to take a conservative approach to enlightenment. There's no harm if an enlightened person does not think he or she is enlightened. There is harm if a unenlightened person thinks that he or she is enlightened. So let's take a conservative approach and say that, no, I don't think I'm really enlightened. I'm a seeker. I'm trying just like everybody else, and it's not such a big problem, because non-dualism says you are that ultimate reality, regardless of whether you're enlightened or not. Enlightenment is just the key which reveals it to you. You are already that. You are already safe. It is already for all time all right. So I think that's more important than that's a source of great solace, rather than whether I'm enlightened or not enlightened.
Want to comment on that, Rupert? You don't have to, but if you want to.
Happiness doesn't need outside confirmation. If we have to ask the question, am I happy? Then you can be sure you're not happy. If you're happy, the question, am I happy, never arises. So the question, am I enlightened? It simply doesn't arise. And if it does arise, I would suggest there was more investigation to do. What would that investigation be? It would be to investigate the I who is not sure whether or not it is enlightened.
Okay. On that note, I like the way the segues are working here. Here's a kind of a dual question from Anubhav Khanna in New Zealand and Pratap Singh Bhatt. I'm not sure where he's from, but he says that they both say, Swami says in many of his videos that deep sleep is an experience of nothing and not no experience. And I'm adding a bit here myself. I would add that the experience of nothing implies the usual subject-object structure of experience, whereas numerous sages and scriptures say that for the enlightened, pure awareness is awake to itself during sleep, just as it is in waking and dreaming. For instance, Ramana Maharshi said, it is the jnani that sleeps, but he sleeps without sleeping, or is awake while sleeping. And I met a number of people, one friend in particular who says he hasn't slept for 60 years. Of course, he goes to bed at night and snores, but inner awareness is, in fact, he said when this first began, he felt like when he was going to sleep at night that he was actually waking up because awareness became more bright and clear. And then when he woke up in the morning and started his day, he felt like it was diminished somewhat by the impact of sensory experience. So could maintaining awareness that clearly during sleep be a kind of a litmus test of a really genuine level of realization that you can't just psych yourself into?
Shall I respond to that?
Sure.
I don't think that the fact that one so-called maintains awareness during deep sleep is a litmus test. The litmus test for the recognition of our true nature is unshakable peace. As regards remaining aware during deep sleep, it's a concept that is based on a misunderstanding. Awareness is not something that a person has during the waking and dreaming states and may or may not maintain during deep sleep. But we are awareness, and awareness is like the sun. It is always on. There's no question of awareness modulating its brightness or going through three states. Awareness is just always on, always fully aware. In the waking state, it seems to be veiled by thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. In the dream state, it seems to be veiled by thoughts and images. And in the deep sleep state. It just remains as it always, or rather as it eternally is, unveiled, knowing itself as it is. So deep sleep is not, as is commonly supposed, the absence of awareness. It is the awareness of absence, but not the awareness of absence as an object. Even the phrase "the awareness of absence" is a concession to the person who believes that deep sleep is the absence of awareness. It is just awareness all alone by itself, and that is why all of us look forward to deep sleep, because we know that in deep sleep, if deep sleep was the annihilation of ourself, or the non-existence of ourself, we would all fear deep sleep, because we would feel that we were going to come to an end. No, we all look forward to deep sleep. Why? Because all our troubles come to an end. Our thoughts, feelings, activities, relationships, sensations, all of these come to an end, and they leave us all alone enjoying our own being, which is the experience of peace. Awareness doesn't suddenly light up in deep sleep. It just remains exactly as it always is, just as each of our screens will not change its nature when this meeting comes to an end. The screen will simply be divested of a couple of faces, and the screen will actually remain the same. So awareness is, deep sleep is like that, and it's why we all look forward to sleep. In fact, just tell a brief story about my son Matthew. When he was very young, he would sometimes get inconsolably upset about whatever, and his mother and I could not console him, and sometimes he would just lie down and just say, "I want to go to sleep." And it was this beautiful, innocent, but very wise understanding. He had, as indeed we all have, he had tasted, of course he didn't formulate it like this, but he had tasted the peace of his true nature in deep sleep. He instinctively knew that the way to access that peace in the middle of his unhappiness was simply to go to sleep. In other words, what he was saying, I'm going to go to sleep because I know all my troubles will leave me all alone in my true nature. So as Ramana Maharshi said, sorry, Rick, as Ramana Maharshi said, meditating is simply like falling asleep whilst remaining awake. And I would extend that and not just confine it to meditation, but to suggest that everyday life is simply the art of everyday life is to remain in contact with the peace that is our essential nature, not just in the absence of experience, as in deep sleep, but in the midst of experience.
Before Swami responds to that, and hopefully we have a little wiggle room on the time here, would you say, in your understanding and from various scriptural authorities, that sleep for an enlightened being is a different experience than it is for an ordinary person? Isn't there some verse in the Gita about that which is night for all beings is day for the sage who sees, or something like that?
Should I go ahead with that?
Yes, please.
Yes. First of all, this waking and dreaming and sleep are activities of the mind. They are related to the mind and also secondarily to the body, not to consciousness, not to awareness. So awareness is ever awake, as Rupert just said. It's always shining. It is not at all affected by waking. It's not at all affected by dreams, and not at all affected by deep sleep. It shines upon the waking world. It shines equally. Let's just say you shine upon your waking world, you shine upon your dreams, and you shine upon the darkness which you call deep sleep after waking up. So the presence of objects is illumined in waking state and in dream state. That's when the mind is functioning. It's the mind which goes to sleep. And so it's like deep sleep is like when there is light, but nothing to reflect that light. You see, most of the light that we see is reflected light. Unless we look directly at the sun or the source of light, mostly it's light reflected from objects. But imagine if there's a beam of light and there's nothing to reflect that light. then you wouldn't even see the beam of light. It would just look like darkness. But the moment you introduce something into that beam of light, so for example, there's light right here, and we don't see it. It seems like space. But the moment you see, my hand shines brilliantly in this light. And the moment I remove it, there seems to be empty space right there. Similarly, waking and dream throw up objects, physical or subtle, mental, and they shine in the light of consciousness. Of course, a higher level of understanding would be that these objects are also nothing other than consciousness itself. In dream, the throwing up of objects stops in deep sleep. After the dream goes into deep sleep, there are no more objects unless you regard that blankness itself as an object. So consciousness is always there. A monk wrote a poem called The Midnight Sun. Now imagine, that sounds contradictory. How can it be midnight if the sun is blazing forth? But he says that is the state in deep sleep or in samadhi, in nirvikalpa samadhi. It is the sun blazing forth in all its glory, and yet it's somehow midnight. It's darkness all around. So that's what deep sleep is. Now, Advaita does not recommend that you go into deep sleep. What it recommends is consider the experience of deep sleep. It's very important. It's helpful for enlightenment. How? Often when we try to think of awareness, we're still thinking of the mind, some activity of the mind. One monk said that we tend to smuggle the mind into awareness. Now, a case which we all have is of deep sleep, where the mind has ceased. When we wake up and reflect back upon what happened in deep sleep, the mind had totally ceased. There was no thinking, no external world, no dreams, no thoughts, perceptions, not even the ego, stopped. And yet, if we can appreciate how is awareness also there in deep sleep, or how is deep sleep also illumined by awareness, we will get it. Because, yeah, Rupert wanted to.
Well, no, finish, please. Swami.
Yeah, that's what, as Rupert was saying, it is, awareness seems to be veiled in the waking state. It seems to be veiled in dreams. But when you reflect upon deep sleep, if one does not understand what awareness is in itself, you'll say there's no awareness in deep sleep. That's what most people would say. And that's where the difficulty in accepting that there is awareness in deep sleep, that's where the difficulty lies, because you're still smuggling in the mind and thinking that is awareness. If one could appreciate how is there awareness in deep sleep, one would get it. Yes.
I love your image, Swami, of the midnight sun. And it's a beautiful image to take with us, the sun of awareness that shines brightly behind and in the midst of all experience. So we should leave it there.
Rupert?
I'm sure that we could carry on talking, maybe not for 500 years, Swami, but certainly for quite a few hours. And so thank you, and thank you, Rick, for your masterful moderation. You haven't had to use the mute button once. So thank you, Swami. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Deanne, who I believe did a lot of work for you, Swami, behind the scenes. Likewise, Francesca and Ruthie for me, and Prabodh for not only having this initial idea to bring us together. So thank you for that beautiful idea and for joining us here today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. This beautiful, beautiful sharing of minds and hearts.
So much. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupert.
Thank you, Rick.
And everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
And sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but
Well, we would have been here for almost 500 years if we'd gone through all the questions. There were so many of them. But thank you all for your beautiful searching questions. Take care. Keep well.
Take care. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.